Welcome, Attorney Ritter. We appreciate your presence. Attorney Ritter is with the firm of Shipman and Goodwin, and they have given us very sage advice in all issues of bonding over the last several decades. Because we are contemplating 2 or 3 questions for roads, roofs, and perhaps a pool referendum this summer, we thought it would be timely to have him come now. He wanted to come in person, but he is in session, so I thank you so very much, Matt, for taking the time out of your busy schedule this evening for us. And what's happened in the past, Matt, individuals have asked when we had board school referendums, Mr. Kuzel and others on the council, we feel sometimes our hands are tied, Matt, that we can't say anything after a certain point. We can't spend any money. Council persons feel reluctant because we don't want to run afoul of state law in regard to those very intricate statutes surrounding bonding and such. So we figured we'd invite you to give us a little primer. That's really the issue, and then we could open it up to questions, but just maybe walk us through the process about, you know, there are some timelines, time frames, and some drop dead dates after which we have to be very careful. But I wanted people to know they do have a First Amendment right. We don't want it to conflict with their duty as counselors and put a referendum or our bonding in jeopardy. So we thought we would invite you this time and sort of give us a heads up before we endeavor to do these questions for the fall election this year.
Attorney Ritter, again, we appreciate you joining us tonight at the Enfield Town Council. And just real quick, we're contemplating having 3 referendums for the fall: what we're calling a roads, a roofs, and a recreation. So those sort of the 3 things, just some context of what we're, sort of what we're asking for your opinion on. So again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris and Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that, and I will try to keep my opening summary brief, and then get to questions, because what I find when I do this is people prefer to ask questions because they have specific stuff they're thinking about that's in their mind, as opposed to me guessing it. Look, at the end of the day, the guiding statute is 9-369B as in book, or B as in boy. And that statute comes into play a lot when it comes to municipalities and referendums. The reason I'm glad I'm here tonight to talk with you all, I think the reason the town manager and you all want to have this is, there's been a large rise in complaints related to pending referendums. You get hundreds every year filed with the State Election Enforcement Commission. But as the town manager noted, there's a huge distinction between what you do on Board of Ed time or town time, in this case for you all, versus what you do in your personal lives. So at the end of the day, I'll start with one very easy rule. The statute in question restricts your ability as town council members, for example, to utilize town resources to advocate for or against a referendum question, no matter what it is, bonding or any other referendum question you may have, when the referendum is legally pending. So what does it mean to be legally pending? As your bond counsel, when we do the bond resolutions after the public hearings, we've done that. We draft those long bond resolutions. I know you don't all love the way we sometimes do the questions. But once that is voted on, in that same package we have you vote on the bond resolution, you send it to referendum. Right, pursuant to the charter, we pick the date and time. It's at that meeting at night, which tends to happen around 8 or 9 o'clock at night in my experience with you all. Now we have a pending referendum. All legal steps have been taken to make it a pending referendum. So that morning before you vote, it's not a pending referendum. You could spend town resources advocating for or against as late as that morning, that afternoon. It's that moment that SEEK would look at, okay? So prior to that pending referendum, which right now, April 19th, you have no pending referendums legally. So the town could advocate any way it sees fit for or against the referendum questions. So what does that mean? Your town council emails. You could send an email right now to people or respond to emails and say, I'm going to be in favor of these bond projects, here's why. You could send out a flyer to homes. You could put stuff on websites, PowerPoint presentations, advocating for the projects. But the minute we hit the pending referendum, it changes. And you're limited to advocating for it in your private capacity. So what's the distinction, okay? The distinction would be, you can't use your town council email. So let's say we made the referendum pending, I'm gonna pick a date, June 15th. So now it's August 15th, and the referendum is gonna be in the fall. You no longer could send that same email to 100 people from your town council email address. Why? That email address is a town council email address. The town pays money to provide that email address for you, as de minimis as it may be. But your Gmail account or your Hotmail account that is personal, done from your own computer, you can send that email out. advocating for the project. You can't take a photocopier at town hall once it's a pending referendum and photocopy flyers that are in favor of it, for example. You can't have PowerPoint presentations online that advocate for it. But in your private capacity, could you take time on a Saturday morning and go door knock and advocate for the project? You bet. You absolutely have the right to do that. Could you go to a restaurant where there was a gathering of people who wanted it to pass and meet with them and advocate for it? Absolutely. You just can't use town resources. So that's the pending referendum. Then the question that gets asked sometimes is, okay, well, what is a town resource versus not a town resource? And I gave you examples. They're pretty technical about it. Again, they talk about anything from a website to an email address, photocopiers. So it may be $5 or $1,000. It is using town resources. It may change the measure of punishment, if you will, if someone filed a complaint, if it was $5 versus $1,000. But you want to be mindful of that. The next step we got to talk about a little bit here is also sort of this town notification system and what's advocating for or against. So there are things, often when we do your bond resolutions, we authorize you all, pursuant to that same chapter in the statutes, do what's called explanatory text, right? So I think most of you, when you do the referendum, you guys mail out explanatory text sometimes to every household. If you're getting an absentee ballot, it would come with the absentee ballot. That explanatory text is specifically carved out in the statute because the town's paying for it, it's town resources, but we will scrub it along with your town attorney to make sure it's not advocating. Here's the difference between advocating and not advocating. The project is going to cost $4.2 million. It's a fact. You're asking for the approval of that amount of money. What's not okay is the town is asking for the grand bargain of $4.2 million to redo the roads. Or this project will change the town forever. The town will be so much better off because of this project. Those are the kind of things we would scrub and say those are advocating versus just being factual. How many square feet a particular building might be, how many lanes a pool might be, what roads you would pave. All that is explanatory text and is allowed. So we kind of get involved in what's advocating and what's not, but those are the exceptions. There is also an exception for time, date, and place. So the legislature, when they've changed the laws over the years, the SEEK, election enforcement, have acknowledged that a town or a board of education may want to put on their website the time, date, and place and the questions, right? That's factual information. So there was also a carve out for time, date, and place of a referendum, but you can't advocate. So that is, in about a couple of minutes, a pretty quick summary of when it's triggered, what's advocating versus what is not, what are the exceptions. And I'll close with, before we take questions, the most common thing that we see as violating is people using the email or the town website. And it's often not on purpose. People are often just forget it's on the website or it's on a web page they forgot was out there, and they have a PowerPoint from an earlier time that they didn't take down. Look, SEEK is mindful of whether it was an intentional action or not, but we would ask you to think about scrubbing it. The other thing that also comes up a lot is, and I should have mentioned this, is can I write an editorial for a newspaper or can I respond to emails from constituents? And the answer is yes. So they will allow you as a town council member, when the referendum is pending, if you get an email from a constituent, please explain why you're in favor of this project. You can respond, because that is not an unsolicited email to a couple dozen people saying, this is why I'm voting yes. So they actually do even draw that distinction versus being emailed versus just sending out a big email. And you are allowed to do a press conference or editorial in a newspaper advocating for the project. There's a carve out for that. And that's even when the referendum is pending. So I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, and I hope I covered some stuff you were thinking about. But that's a pretty good quick summary of the pending referendum laws.
Thank you very much, sir. Again, you answered one of my questions near the end, but thank you for your detail. We're going to open up the questions, Attorney Ritter. First is Councilor Sakala.
Hi, thank you. So here's a hypothetical. I'm a member of the town council. I'm also a member of the Joint Facilities Committee. The Joint Facilities Committee has sort of helped bring these referendum to the town council. Can I, as a member of this Joint Facility Committee, be somewhere to, after the referendum resolution is pending and after we have sort of a valid pending question, can I, as a member of that Joint Facilities Committee, advocate for or against?
No, it applies to being on any town board. So that facility committee you're talking about is a town board. You have meetings, they're open to the public, you have agendas. So you're in the same boat, just like a Board of Education member would be as well if they were advocating for a school project.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have any other questions? Deputy Mayor Suzak?
Where the, I'll take this off, jeez. Okay, so last referendum we did was JFK, Joint Facilities did that. Members of the Joint Facilities formed the PAC. You need to form a PAC in order to have a voice. There were members of Board of Ed and members of, I believe, Town Council that were also, I guess, officers in the PAC. So that isn't okay as long as they meet in a private building and spend their own money.
That was kind of a leaning question for you.
Yeah, that's right. I told you what happened, and I want you to tell me it could happen again.
Yeah, so Deputy Mayor, it's interesting because I get asked a lot about political action committees. I can't advise anybody about what a PAC can do and what it cannot do. Why? Because you have to do it in your private capacity. But to answer your question, that is exactly the key word. It's in your private life. It's not using town resources, as you said. And so if people, when they're not town councilors or in a town building or using town resources, want to go do something on their personal time, whether it's door knocking or you mentioned that expenditure route, they are free to do that in their personal time. But they'd have to get advice from a different lawyer, not a town lawyer.
Right, we did get that advice before we did it last time, so I guess I'm more sharing it with everybody and letting you know what might happen, I guess. So I actually saw something interesting in the newspaper, and I thought it was the town of Vernon, where 2 town councilors wrote editorials. One was for the referendum and one was against the referendum. And I thought that was fascinating because I didn't actually think that we could do something like that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Oh, sorry, yeah, but that exception for newspapers is in there. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Attorney Ritter,
Yeah.
I have actually 2 questions. You answered one of them already, but right, so we get questions from residents who sometimes I think some of us get sometimes like, okay, should we answer them? If someone sends us an email saying, right, why did you support it, why you don't support it, or question that if it's unsolicited, they come to us, we can answer that question in an email, in a town email or a board email.
Yeah, so, if you get an email from a constituent asking you, I think it's okay. You got to be careful. You can't go forward it on. You can't take that and begin to post it everywhere.
Okay.
But if you're having a one-on-one conversation and they reached out, they do allow that. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's
But for example, there was one case where somebody copied, 64 people on it.
right.
And they said, well, that's not what the statute allows, right?
Yeah, but a citizen could do that.
But the citizen could do it, right? We just can't do it.
Oh, the citizen's not a member of the town council, so they have no ability, to my knowledge, to spend town resources, right?
So I apologize. This is a dumb question, but sometimes it's not unanimous. Some people may vote for it, to make it a pending referendum. Some people may vote against it. I'm assuming the rules stay. So if you voted against something, but it still made it to referendum, I'm assuming the same rules apply to the individual who voted against. If you say I wasn't for X, Y, Z, it's sort of the same criteria whether you're for or against. I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mayor. The statute does say approval or disapproval, because I think
Okay.
people thought about that example where someone said, well, I was a no vote, so I'm never going to advocate for, but they said you can't advocate against either.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Councilor Sakala.
So I have a follow up on that. So you said we can't sort of copy everybody on a reply, like reply all if there's 55 people on it. What if somebody on Facebook posts, attorney or, Counselor Sakala, how do you feel about the referendum? Please tell us your position and why. That's going to go on a forum that is going to 1,000 people. Are we allowed to put it on there?
Yeah, and the distinction being that a Facebook page presumably is I assume it's your personal or even your town council. I don't see what town resources are being used to maintain it. As long as it's your account, you control it. People aren't posting for you who are paid for with town resources, and it's a personal page. You can respond to anybody you want. I was referring more to when you use your town email.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Instagram, Twitter, if it's your personal stuff, again, that's on your own time. Now, if you have I don't know if you have a town phone or a town computer, I would use a personal computer.
Yeah, use your own personal computer. Don't use your.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Town Manager Chris Bromson.
I'll just follow up. Thank you so very, very much. We're going to post this on the town website tomorrow, so our residents will be able to avail themselves of it. And And I imagine we can keep this up.
We can keep this up even after the drop dead date so people can refer to it if they have questions. But we can, in other words, we're going to do PowerPoints probably for the roads, the roofs, and the recreation, and those can be up. It's wonderful. But once we then have that evening meeting, the file that evening we'll scrub it, and it will no longer be on the town websites. My question, same thing with the pamphlets. We do it before, once we know if we want to distribute those at the library, the senior center, the police department, through our Enfield Express, that's fine. But once we have the drop dead date and we vote it, we won't disseminate them any longer, correct?
Is that to me, Mr. Town Manager?
Yes, it is.
It's hard to tell. That is correct, yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. We have a very successful Enfield Farmers Market. We have over 80 vendors that come. We have it every Sunday. So, I've seen in the past that more was PAX Pro, for the school referendums. What are we allowed to have at that booth? I mean, after the drop dead date. If we have approved explanatory text that you've approved, that would be okay. Can you have a picture that's neutral that would show the recreation? With the pool that's envisioned. I guess we'll have to talk to you as we get closer, but we would just hope that we could have something that's legal and neutral, but let a lot of our residents who come through during the summer into the fall see what the proposed referendums were.
Yeah, I think it would be very appropriate to have what the questions are, the time, date, and places I mentioned, explanatory text, all exceptions. Look, the photo thing is funny because they tend to be renderings they're nice, right? The people who draw them don't make them not look nice. They want the renderings to look nice. I think that is fine. On something like that for drawings, just to be really careful, I would even call Seek and just ask them. They are terrific with giving advice. My guess is they would say that's fine. But on something like that, we always just call them and ask. They get back to you the same day. They're very, very helpful.
Excellent. That's what we'll do. And in regard to the exceptions, we're going to have our town attorney follow up on those, and we'll reduce it to writing so as we get closer and memories fade, we'll have all this at our fingertips, a little cheat sheet that we'll use so we don't run afoul of any of the laws. And I just can't thank you enough for really, this has been illuminating and so helpful. And again, we'll put it up on our website, and a lot of residents will see it and have a better understanding of the do's and don'ts on the referendum advocacy by the council and perhaps the board.
So Attorney Ritter, one last thing. So just to be clear, the drop dead date is when the council votes, assuming yay. First meeting in September is generally when we do it, right? So that is the drop dead date. So before then in the summer, right? So then to Chris's point, we could put pictures to let people know this is what our vision is, right? It's just that after September, whatever that first meeting is, that's when, right, if it's approved, and I apologize, these would be, right, there'd have to be each individual question. So I guess could we write them as one, or would it have to be three individual? If we're having three separate referendums.
Yeah, I mean, those are always good questions, right? I mean, every town does it differently, and they do it. The reason why, I would say this, right? Could you convince us that you could probably do all three of these in one question? You probably could. I'd have to confirm that with the town charter. Some town charters specifically say, and off the top of my head, don't know if your charter does that. The problem is if one project becomes the problem, you could kill all three.
Right.
So most towns don't choose that, but I do know towns that do combine a bunch. They often will combine a bunch of Board of Ed projects and a bunch of town projects. I do see that, and they're not always related.
Okay.
Yep.
And just to be clear, Matt, after the drop dead date, there's only the carved out exceptions, particularly the questions and the explanatory text. But prior to that, we already know what we want to do on our road referendum. It's been identified. We've done 5 since 2000, likewise on the roofs and perhaps the recreation. So I just want to be clear so there's no misunderstanding. If we want to flat out advocate and say in a pamphlet and on our website that this council sitting here when we agree before the question is put in September, we can do that. We can say this is the greatest referendum and we'll change the town for decades to come and expend money to do it. We don't have to be neutral. It's only after the drop dead date that we have to stop all of that and just give the facts, ma'am, nothing but the facts.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's right, exactly. Yep.
I just want to clear because people probably will have a misunderstanding to say, well, you said that this pool is the greatest thing for the town or these roads we need. And I want to be able to advocate because I think the council does feel very strongly that these projects will be, very changeful and transformational for the next decades in the town. And we just want to be able to say that and know we're on firm ground before the drop dead date. So thank you.
Yep.
Attorney Ritter, every time you come, really, Bond Council is one of the most exciting presentations we have at the Enfield Town Council, so we thank you every time you join.
I guess I'm kind of sorry to hear that, but I hope your meetings get more exciting. But it's a pleasure to be here, and I know we'll have other questions, and you feel free to email anytime, and we'll get you guys the answer.
Thank you very much for joining again. We appreciate your time as always. Thank you, sir.